Hare Krishna. August 1st, when Prabhupada returned to London and heard that Sumati Maharaji was arriving there, he went with a group of his disciples to meet her at the airport. That's nice. See, Prabhupada has so much of respect to meet her at the airport, even though he's now very famous and great. Not now, before also he was a great personality, right? But just he was taking humble position to get help from Sumati Maharaji. So he went to meet her at the airport. He talked with her about his plans for Hare Krishna land at Juhu and of his desire to form a board of trustees consisting of ISKCON's Bombay Life members. Sumati Maharaji agreed to be president of the board. Oh, nice, wonderful. Which would meet regularly and give advice for managing ISKCON's Bombay project. Each trustee would also contribute a large sum of money towards developing a particular area of the project. Prabhupada asked Mrs. Moraji to donate for the temple. He would request Mr. Khandelwal to donate for the library and Mr. N for the other two things. Mr. N, how Mr. N will give. There's a big story with Mr. N. That Mr. N had not yet produced the deed, however, continued to weigh heavily on Prabhupada's mind, and he questioned Mr. N's intentions and Giriraj's competence. If the only obstacle was the 5 lakh tax, then Prabhupada had already instructed Giriraj to approach ISKCON's wealthy friends and secure a loan. What was the difficulty? But Giriraj's communication sounded as if such a solution was impossible. On August 27, Prabhupada telegrammed Giriraj, has convinced deed been signed if not finished immediately, and why details. Again, Giriraj went to Mr. N, although anticipating Mr. N's reply. This time, however, Mr. N added yet another complication, reminding Giriraj that ISKCON had not yet obtained permission from the charity commissioner. ISKCON was a public charitable trust and so required permission from the charity commissioner before acquiring property. Mr. N put the burden back onto ISKCON. At the charity commissioner's office, Giriraj learned that he should have applied for permission 6 months prior to signing the agreement for the land. To Giriraj and other devotees in Bombay, the affair had become a huge Gordian knot. Look at this. New Brindavan, West Virginia, August 30, 1972. Only 2 days remained until the Janmashtami celebration, and more than 300 disciples had gathered to be with Srila Prabhupada. Janmashtami, Krishna's appearance day, is always followed immediately by Srila Prabhupada's appearance day. And this year, with so many devotees gathered in a holy place with Prabhupada, the occasion promised to be occasionally especially auspicious. Prabhupada had agreed to lecture every evening with an outdoor pavilion constructed for the occasion atop one of New Vrindavan's many hills. The lecture series was titled Bhagavata Dharma Discourses, and through these meetings, Prabhupada had set an example for his disciples that they hold similar festivals in another part of the country. Through Bhagavad Dharma Discourses and book distributions, the Krishna conscious movement would increase its purifying influence throughout the world. Prabhupada lived during these days in a small wood frame house in the New Vrindavan woods. He regularly received visitors and lectured in the evening. Each evening before his lecture at the pavilion, the devotees would hold a kirtan and carry Prabhupada up the long, steep hill on a palanquin. And afterwards, as they carried him back down, he would be surrounded by chanting disciples bearing lanterns and torches. Sounds like a very beautiful scenario, isn't it? So here, Mr. N, August 1st, did I say August 1st? Okay, August 1st, Prabhupada is going to London, and he learned that Sumati Maharaji also is arriving in London. So he went to see her in the airport, and he asked that about the Bombay project, Jew project, that they should form a board and people should help. president of the board because he needs a lot of money. She agreed to support. That's a beautiful thing. And he said that other people also I'll ask to do, and Mr. N also will give something. Now here, Mr. N is creating a nuisance here. He says that, oh, now you have not taken permission from, what do you call, the charity. Okay. So he said that require permission from the charity commissioner before acquiring property. Maybe it's a law in Bombay or something, I don't know. But the charity commissioner says, oh, you're supposed to take care 6 months before for your purchase. So now he put in back to on the shoulder of ISKCON, court of ISKCON. So charity commissioners, he's supposed to do 6 months before. Wait. So it becomes very difficult for devotees, Giriraj Swami and others, to handle this issue. Now it's coming back to New Vrindavan, West Virginia, August 30, 1972. 300 disciples are gathered to celebrate Janmashtami with Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was giving lecture every evening. And they built a wooden, I think, wooden build house or something for him like that, cabin kind of thing for Prabhupada to stay. And they would come, carry him in every evening on the palanquin, and receive in very nice, very wonderful way. Looks like a very special time. They were relishing the time as a season of Srila Prabhupada. And now Prabhupada would give lecture on the Bhagavad Dharma discourses, and he asked similar things should be set up for other places. I would like to find out what is Bhagavad Dharma discourses. Why he named it, they set up classes, he put something you need to find out on Bhagavad Dharma discourses. Generally, it's unusual title. Just I wanted to say. Okay, Nipa, you please.
Sureshwara, the path from the pavilion wound down and around on its way to the temple. I got there at dusk and beheld Srila Prabhupada floating jubilantly in his palanquin atop a sea of devotees. There were hundreds of devotees with tumultuous kirtana and roaring, plus dust was kicked up everywhere from all the people. It looked spectacular, like a like a panoramic scene from one of these epic movies, The Ten Commandments or Exodus, only much more because it was transcendental. I just fell down in the dust as Prabhupada's palanquin came gliding past. It was very wild but devotional. But to Gopala. It was a small palanquin carried by 4 men. There were some ropes for Prabhupada to hold on to, and it wasn't very comfortable ride for him. But it was an amazing scene. Devotees with torches, electric torches, and fire torches and lanterns, and Prabhupada came coming down in its palanquin down the trail. Hundreds of devotees were surrounding him. Kirtana was roaring. I kept trying to get up close to Prabhupada and get a glance. Janava Devi Dasi. We are we are we were running down the steep hill in the dark amid the loud chanting of river of devotees, and our feet seemed to never touch the ground. About halfway down, I caught up to the palanquin, but then I realized that being close to Srila Prabhupada meant far more than physical proximity, and that I needed to become much more serious about Krishna consciousness in order to feel less distant from him. On Janmashtami night, Prabhupada went to the temple and listened to the readings from Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, about Lord Krishna's birth. Around 2 a.m., he noticed many devotees were nodding. You are getting tired, he said, smiling, and he ended the program. Even in the midst of such a large festival, Prabhupada was again plunged into struggle over the Bombay land. A letter arrived from Giriraj explaining his failure to secure the 5 lakhs loan owed the government and government's refusal to grant permission. He also mentioned his suspicion that Mr. N was influencing the charity commissioner's decision. Prabhupada had a copy of the purchase agreement with him, and he studied it carefully. Again, he concluded that his position was strong. Since he was occupying the land according to the terms of agreement, he had paid 2 lakhs as promised, but Mr. N had not turned over the deed. Now more money was being demanded, and Prabhupada had said Giriraj should pay this money and get the deed. As for the permission from the government charity commissioner, there was no mention of it in the agreement. Although Mr. N's tactics were apparently bewildering Giriraj, Prabhupada saw them as only empty bluffs. He telegrammed Giriraj, take bank mortgage, pay off N. Before receiving any reply from Giriraj, Prabhupada sent another telegram. Why do you say conveyance impossible? Everything clear in the agreement of purchase, conveyance to be executed immediately according to the terms of agreement of purchase. So, here, Prabhupada, here is Sureshwara. He's the path from. He's saying that the path from pavilion was bound down, and it was around on its way to temple. And on its way to temple they were, and they it got dusk, and they were holding. Srila Prabhupada was floating jubilantly on his palanquin atop a sea of devotees. There were hundreds of devotees with tumultuous kirtana, and they were roaring, plus, dust was kicking up. It looked spectacular, and it was like one of those epic movies like the Ten Commandments or Exodus, and much more. And it was transcendental. And it just felt like Prabhupada was gliding past on his palanquin, and it was very devotional. And there's another devotee, Batu Gopala. He said the small palanquin carried by four men, and there were ropes for Prabhupada to hold on to for him to be comfortable. And it was an amazing scene. And there were torches and electric torches carried by devotees, and fire torches and lanterns. And Prabhupada came down on his palanquin down the trail. And there were hundreds of devotees surrounding, and the kirtana was going on, roaring up, and kept up close to Prabhupada and get a glance. In the meanwhile, Jahnavi Devi Dasi came running down the steep hill in dark, chanting aloud, and the rivers and feet seemed to never touch the ground. And halfway down, it caught up to the palanquin and realized that being close to Srila Prabhupada meant far more than the physical proximity. And it needed much serious about Krishna consciousness than to feel being distant, less distant from him. On Janmashtami night, Prabhupada went to the temple and listened to readings from Krishna. And around 2 a.m., he noticed many devotees were nodding that you are getting tired. And he said, smiling, and he ended the program then. And in the midst of such a festival, Prabhupada was still plunged over the Bombay land. He was thinking about it. And a letter arrived from Giriraj explaining his failure to secure 5 lakhs loan from the government. And the government refused to grant permission. And he also mentioned in the letter that Mr. N was influencing the charity commissioner's decision. And Prabhupada got a copy of the purchase agreement with him, and he read it carefully. And he concluded that the position was strong since he was occupying the land according to the terms of the agreement. And he paid 2 lakhs also as promised by Mr. N. But now more money was being demanded. And Prabhupada said Giriraj should pay this money and get the deed done. And as for the permission from the government charity commissioner, there was no mention of it on the agreement. Although Mr. N's tactics were like kind of bewildering Giriraj, Prabhupada did not saw them as empty bluffs. So he telegrammed Giriraj saying that take the bank mortgage and pay off N. And before receiving the reply from Giriraj, Prabhupada also sent another telegram saying that why do you mention that conveyance is impossible? Everything looks good in the agreement of purchase and purchase conveyance to be executed immediately as per the terms of the agreement of purchase. Exactly.
Okay. I can go.
On Srila Prabhupada's appearance day morning, he went up the hill to the pavilion to speak. It was a beautiful late summer's day, and he sat on the stage on a red Vyasasan beside the deities of Radha Damodar and Lord Jagannath. In addition to hundreds of his disciples, hundreds of guests were also present, the entire audience numbering about 1,000. The festival was a newsworthy turnout of the Hare Krishna movement, and reporters from the New York Times and other newspapers were on hand, along with television film crews. Prabhupada spoke, explaining how, although an observer might understand the devotee's worship of the spiritual master, no one should think that the spiritual master
Might misunderstand.
might misunderstand the devotees' worship of their spiritual master, no one should think that the spiritual master was presenting himself as God. Prabhupada compared the spiritual master to a tax collector. As a tax collector collects money only on behalf of the king, so the spiritual master receives honor but on behalf of Lord Krishna. Everyone should serve and bow down to the Supreme Lord, and the spiritual master comes and collects obeisances and worship on behalf of God, who accepts any sincere worship of the spiritual master as an offering to himself. Prabhupada ended his lecture, and a great feast climaxed the day and a half of fasting. Prabhupada then returned to the backyard of his little house, where he talked with some of the devotees. Hridyananda Goswami. Prabhupada was taking his massage sitting on a straw mat outside his cabin. Suddenly, two little kittens appeared by his mat, and they were rolling around, tumbling. They were wrestling, tumbling, rolling around and around. Immediately I thought, oh, they are contaminated. I have to get them away. The cats actually tumbled right in onto Prabhupada's mat. They rolled into a little furry ball right over to Prabhupada's feet. Prabhupada began tickling them under their chins. He was laughing, rubbing under their chins. Then he turned to me, sort of in a very jolly mood, and said, just see, even here there is love. Srutakirti. I was in charge of the kitchen, so I was too busy to see Prabhupada at all. He was there for a week, and practically the whole time I did not get to see him. I was so upset. I was doing all this service, and I had no opportunity to see Prabhupada. Always cooking until midnight. I felt so bad. So here talks about Prabhupada's appearance day on the morning. Prabhupada sat on a Vyasasan beside the deities of Radha Damodar and Lord Jagannath. And in addition to his disciples, there were a lot of guests. So the entire audience was almost near 1,000. There were also reporters and television film crews from the New York Times. Prabhupada spoke about how anybody should not misunderstand the devotees' worship of the spiritual master. It should not be understood that the spiritual master is God, but he says that he gives an analogy here that the spiritual master to a tax collector. As the tax collector collects money on behalf of the king, the spiritual master receives honor, but he collects all of them and on behalf of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he also said that the Supreme Personality of Godhead also accepts any sincere worship to the spiritual master as an offering to himself. And then Prabhupada ended his lecture, and there was a great feast. And Prabhupada came back to his small cabin, and he talked to some of the devotees. And Hridyananda Goswami mentions that Prabhupada was tickling some of the two cats who kind of tumbled and came onto Prabhupada's mat. And he mentioned to Hridyananda Goswami that even there within the cats there is love. And another devotee, Srutakirti, she was in charge of the kitchen.
It's not she, it's he.
Yeah.
He is a personal servant.
Okay. Yeah. So he was upset because he was there in the kitchen from morning till midnight doing the cooking service, and he had no opportunity to see Prabhupada, and he felt bad.
Thank you so much. Vasanti, please.
The day before Prabhupada left, Kirtanananda Maharaja came up to me and said, "So you are going to be Prabhupada's servant?" I said, "Oh no, this is wonderful. No, this is terrible." I was so worried. Then he said, "You will be leaving tomorrow morning to go to Pittsburgh." I thought, wow, that was quick. I didn't know anything about it. The following morning, Kirtanananda Maharaja brought me over to the farmhouse Prabhupada was staying at. He took me into Prabhupada's room and said, "This is Srutakirti. He is going to be your servant." Prabhupada looked and I paid my obeisances. Kirtanananda Maharaja said, "He cooks very well, Prabhupada." And Prabhupada said, that's very good. But he hasn't massaged, Maharaja said. And I had never done it before in my life. And then Prabhupada said, that's all right. Anybody can massage. It is very easy. Satya Narayana. I was with a group of devotees. He would travel around the country in an old bus. We would travel around the country in an old bus preaching. On the bus, we had deities, a kitchen, and a shower. Prabhupada was outside of his cabin when we drove up in the bus. When we came on, we received him just as in a regular temple. We gave him Charanamrita. He looked at everything and said that there should be hundreds of buses like this. It wasn't such a big event for him, but he really liked it. Sat- Satsvarupa Dasa Goswami. I saw different leading devotees go down to that house to see Srila Prabhupada on important business. I had no important business that hadn't been answered by him in letters. But I began to feel anxious that I was not going to him, while others were. Finally, one day, my anxiety grew so great that I decided I would go and see His Divine Grace. When I arrived at the door of the house, Prabhupada's servant gladly let me in. And a moment and in a moment, I was seated before Srila Prabhupada. He was seated to take his massage. I expressed to Srila Prabhupada that I had no very urgent questions to ask him in particular, but that I had become anxious to see him and so I had come. Prabhupada replied that I should know better than to come to him out of such anxiety. He said he had already answered everything in his books. Actually, this was very inspiring. On one hand, he was telling me that as an older devotee, I should be assured that by studying his books, everything was there. Not that out of anxiety, I should feel a lacking and on an impulse have to personally see my Guru. It's down, Ripji. It's down. Still down. Yeah. The next morning, Kirtanananda Maharaja brought the devotee to Prabhupada for where Prabhupada was staying at, and he introduced him as he is Srutakirti. He is going to be our servant. He can cook very well, but he doesn't know how to massage. And Prabhupada said, "That's all right. Anybody can massage. It's very easy." And he became Prabhupada's servant. Satyanarayana says that he was with a group of devotees and they were going from place to place in a bus, and it is like a temple, mobile temple with deities, kitchen, and a shower. And as Prabhupada came in, they gave him Charanamrita because they were worshipping the deities. He looked at everything and he was very pleased, and he said there should be hundreds of buses like this. And Satsvarupa Dasa Goswami.
I wanted to give a brief here. So basically, that's what I was wondering when Prabhupada was celebrating Janmashtami, why Radha Damodar is there. So it seems like that time, Radha, New Vrindavan deity is Radha Vrindavan Chandra, right? So, and what is Radha Damodar is? It's a bus tour. I think Tamal Krishna Maharaj has started this or somebody started. And devotees would, almost 40 devotees looks like. They would travel in the bus. They will go to different places. They will do kirtan. They will prasadam. They will have a deity worship. They will have dramas. It was a very successful program, and looks like all bus trip is here. And Prabhupada is saying that you should have more buses. Yeah, just thought I will share with you.
Satsvarupa Dasa Goswami was saying that he saw different devotees going to Srila Prabhupada. They had some urgent matters, but he doesn't have any urgent matter. Since everybody was going, his anxiety grew, and finally he decided to visit his spiritual master. And the servant of Prabhupada let him in, and he seated before Prabhupada, and he expressed his heart that this is what I thought. I don't have any urgent matter, but out of anxiety I came. Then Prabhupada answered him saying that, on one hand, he was answering, you have everything in my books. So you can take the inspiration from there. On the other hand, he was saying he should not try to do things out of impulse and have to personally and feel like personally seeing the Guru. That's out of anxiety he did it, and he doesn't have to do such a thing.
And so Sri Sai Maharaj wrote tons of books, so many books. Prabhupada asked him to write. He wrote so many books, Sri Sai Maharaj. Ajay, you please read.
Now, since I was in his presence, Srila Prabhupada asked me, "What are you doing?" When Srila Prabhupada said that, I got the strong impression that he was regarding me in the proper place as a tiny fool. Here I had just been initiated sannyas, and I was coming before Prabhupada with my assistant asking for his attention. Now that I had asked for his attention, he gave me a surveillance glance, and by his question, he seemed to imply that I was doing nothing or very, very little to spread Krishna consciousness. That was how I interpreted his question. What are you doing? I replied that I was, according to the instructions that I had received from him in a letter, going from temple to temple in my zone and implementing his desire that the students there study the Srimad Bhagavatam in the morning class. I had previously felt very confident that I was exactly following direct orders I had been given in a letter from him. But to my surprise, in that room in New Vrindavan, he began to tell me that visiting temples was not the most important thing. He said that he was pleased with the program of Vishnu Jana Maharaj, who was traveling on a bus. He said I should do like that. I immediately replied, then your instructions that I should go to the different temples is not very important. I should take a bus. And Srila Prabhupada became annoyed and said, it is not that because one thing is more important than the other thing is less important. Everything is important. Not that just because I say this is important to travel on a bus, now you say traveling to the temples is not important. Krishna's head is important. And Krishna's foot is important. Everything about him is important. While Prabhupada participated fully, both formally and informally at New Vrindavan, he still carried a special burden of concern for Bombay. Although he had appointed GBC secretaries to oversee the Krishna consciousness movement in various parts of the world, he was the real GBC secretary of India. Wherever he traveled, therefore, he remained partial to those projects. He was setting the perfect example of a GBC secretary. While conscientiously tending to practical affairs, he remained always transcendental, fully dependent on Krishna and always preaching. After drafting a telegram to Giriraj and hearing of difficulties in Bombay, he would immediately return to his peaceful routine and active preaching. He would take his late morning massage, bathe, and put on tilak methodically and delicately, say his Gayatri mantra with silent composure, take his prasadam, rest for an hour, and in the evening after a full day's activities, go into the temple room or whatever temple he happened to be in, sit on the vyasana and chant Jaya Radha Madhava and speak pure Krishna consciousness. So, the disciple is in front of Prabhupada, and Prabhupada says, hey, like, what have you been doing? Like, what are you doing? And he could tell that, he felt that like Prabhupada was kind of looking down on him, and that he was probably doing something wrong. And, so he says to Prabhupada, like, he felt that maybe he wasn't doing enough to spread Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada, says again, he's like, hey, what are you doing? And he tells him, he says, and I've been doing exactly what you told me to do. I've been doing this one thing that you told me to do. Go to temple to temple and tell them to start reading the Srimad Bhagavatam. And Prabhupada, and he goes, what, is that not what you want me to do? Do you want me to do something different? And Prabhupada says, well, Vishnu Jana Maharaj, he's traveling around on a bus. Why don't you do that? Like, maybe you should do that instead. And he says, why don't you do that? And the guy goes, he's like, well, so you're saying I shouldn't go to the temples? That's not important anymore. I should just get a bus. And I like how Prabhupada says, he's like, look, just because one thing is like, it's not more important because the other thing is less important. Like, it's not, Yeah, he's like, everything is important. Just because I say this is doesn't mean that isn't. And I mean, he sums it up really good, right? He says like, Krishna's head's important. Krishna's foot's important. Literally everything about Krishna is important. Like this being important doesn't make this thing less important. Everything is the thing, is the big thing. So then it goes from there, and it's talking about Prabhupada's still kind of worried about Bombay, and even though Giriraj is there running things, and he has GBC secretaries to oversee things, he still I don't know if it's on paper or just kind of in his head that he's the GBC secretary for India. So no matter where he was, he still felt that India was his responsibility. And
Yeah, because there's a lot of projects going on there, and also other Western and Americans are new. They cannot deal with. That's why he personally interferes.
yeah. And but then it says that while doing this, he was kind of setting the example for how all the GBC secretaries should behave. While yes, they have to deal with the business side and they have to deal with kind of day-to-day operations type things, they still need to remain transcendental and focus on Krishna and preaching. And it says, hey, he would get on the phone with telegram. Forgot this back in the day there. He'd send a telegram to Giriraj, and or he'd hear some issue, he'd address the issue, right, give instruction, and then immediately jump right back into his routine of preaching. And then it kind of outlines his day, right, where he'd wake up, it doesn't sound like a bad day, to be honest. Wake up, get a massage, take a bath, put his tilak on, do his prayers and take prasad, and then he'd go about and do the rest of the day's activities, and preach and chant all day. So yeah, he's just kind of, again, like in the business sense, right? Any good manager or any good leader leads by example, right? It's not just telling you what to do. You should also be able to look at them and see what they should be. They should set the pace for everybody and kind of set the bar for how everybody underneath them should behave. And this is just another example of Prabhupada doing exactly that.
And another thing is that even though he is dealing with so many, it appears like he's not disturbed. He's continuing his prescribed duties very as if unaffected. I think that's what it is been. Other mundane people, if we have many things, some disturbance going on, all our routine and everything gets disturbed. Yes or no? Right? We will have our eating gets disturbed, our sleeping gets disturbed, our work gets disturbed, relationship gets disturbed if something goes wrong with us. And Prabhupada, that's the whole point, is that he's continuing everything nice, wonderful, as if like he's unimpacted, even though he's handling such an important task there. Very nice. Thank you so much. Speaker?
September 8. After New Vrindavan, Prabhupada went to Pittsburgh, where he attended a successful engagement at a large hall, the Syria Mosque. He also met with a Catholic bishop, whom he asked, why do the Christians kill cows in slaughterhouses and thus break the commandment, thou shalt not kill? Prabhupada had often asked this question of Christian priests and was always unsatisfied with the answer. This was no exception. In an informal gathering in his room, Prabhupada stressed outgoing preaching programs, and he advised his newly initiated sannyasis present to follow the example of their godbrother Vishnujana Swami, who travel in a bus from town to town and hold festivals and distribute books and magazines. September 9. The devotees in Dallas had purchased a large church facility and were forming the first ISKCON children's school known as Gurukula. Prabhupada, while traveling in India during 1971 and 1972, had sent a series of letters to Dallas teachers explaining the basic directions he wanted them to take for beginning a Krishna-conscious primary school. We will teach the basic requirements of reading and writing, but also give them real spiritual knowledge how to live perfectly. What other schools of learning offer such as wonderful educational opportunity? Last night, the topic of my lecture at our Delhi Pandal was the necessity for teaching Krishna consciousness in all our schools and colleges. This is a revolutionary thought, but we have seen that the practical outcome of so much godless education in technology and science is that they are producing only hippies one after another. What is the use of the skyscraper buildings if their sons will not maintain them? The old system of Gurukul should be revived as the perfect example of a system designed to produce great men, sober and responsible leaders who know what is the real welfare of the citizens. Just as in former days, all big personalities were trained in this way, now you have got the responsibility to inject this idea in your country. Please do it with a cool head, and very soon we shall see the practical benefits for your countrymen. So after New Vrindavan, Srila Prabhupada went to Pittsburgh. So and there he attended a successful engagement at a large hall in the Syrian mosque. And then he also met with the Catholic priest, and then he asked them a question like, why do Christians kill cows? I mean, slaughterhouses, and then they break the commandment which says, "Thou shalt not kill." So Prabhupada often asks these questions to many other Christian priests, but again he was always unsatisfied with the answer. Even this time, that he did not get any satisfied answer. So again, in a formal gathering in his room, Srila Prabhupada stressed on outgoing preaching programs. And then he advised all his newly initiated sannyasis to follow the example of their godbrother Vishnu Swami, and then to travel in a bus from town to town and hold festivals and distribute books and magazines. On September 9th, so the devotees in Dallas, they purchased a large church facility, and then they were about to form the ISKCON children's school known as Gurukul. So Srila Prabhupada, while he was traveling in India during 1971 and 1972, he had written a lot of letters to all the Dallas teachers. He was explaining them the basic directions he wanted them to begin the Krishna conscious primary school. And then in those letters, Srila Prabhupada mentioned that they'll teach the kids all the basic requirements of reading and writing, but also at the same time give them the real spiritual knowledge. And then so no other school would offer such a wonderful education opportunity of learning about the spiritual knowledge. And then Prabhupada mentioned that in one of the Delhi Pandal's program, there was this topic about this. I mean, the necessary for teaching Krishna consciousness in all schools and colleges. And then Srila Prabhupada felt that this is a very revolutionary thought. And then he was comparing how the practical, how the modern day education is. The modern day education, science and technology is just producing only hippies one after another. And then what is the use of all these skyscraper buildings if there is nobody to maintain them? Then Srila Prabhupada so says that the old system of Gurukul should be revived, because that is a perfect example of a system designed to produce great men, sober and responsible leaders, and then who know what is the real welfare for the citizens. And then Srila Prabhupada says that now all the teachers have got this responsibility to inject this idea in US. And then Srila Prabhupada mentioned to do that with a cool head, and then very soon they'll see all the practical benefits for the people of America. It's only me, Prabhu, today.
You're making her cook nice fish. That's good. Okay, you all know heard about Vishnujan Swami Maharaj. I heard a lot about his beautiful kirtan. It was a very, very successful program. It was very, very successful program. This Radha Damodar bus trip tour has done miracles. The same date is who is installed at Gita Nagari. Now the same date is finally installed in Gita Nagari. Just wanted to say Vishnu Swami is a very nice kirtan here. Okay, who is Vijayanand Prabhu? Please read.
These letters had assured the Dallas devotees that they are doing the most important work for the pleasure of Srila Prabhupada. The school had gained support from other ISKCON members, and many parents had sent their children. By the time of Srila Prabhupada's visit, almost 50 students were enrolled. Prabhupada said Dallas weather reminded him of Calcutta, even though he felt uncomfortably hot, disdaining the use of air conditioning. He shed his kurta and sat on the lawn with his inexperienced but eager group of teachers. The best system of education, he said, was as he had known as a child. One teacher in a room with up to 50 students of various ages and aptitudes. One at a time, the student would come to the teacher's desk, receive guidance and a further assignment, and then return to work. The Gurukula teachers were particularly concerned and puzzled about how to discipline children without being punitive, and Prabhupada unhesitatingly solved all their puzzles. He said the students should both fear and love their teachers. The teacher, by stern countenance, may threaten an unruly child and make him submit, but the teacher should not hit the child. The next day, Srila Prabhupada went into a classroom and sat on a cushion before the class. Holding a blackboard pointer in each hand, he joked that one stick would be used for hitting the students' heads and the other for hitting their hands. The children and teachers became delighted to see Prabhupada's playful mood. And when he asked if anyone wanted to get hit, both teachers and students moved forward, holding their hands out for a merciful slap from Srila Prabhupada. To demonstrate how to teach, Prabhupada called for a volunteer. Dwarakadisha came forward. Prabhupada placed his venerable hand over the boys, guided him repeatedly in forming the first letter of the Sanskrit alphabet. News of Bombay followed Prabhupada to Dallas. A devotee who had recently come to the west from Bombay informed Prabhupada of Giriraja's recent talk of resigning as a president of the center. Depressed by his ineffectiveness in dealing with Mr. N, the lawyers and the government, and harassed by bickering and uncooperative devotees, he was considered himself unworthy to keep the charge. So basically, Prabhupada's letters assured Dallas devotees that they're doing the most important work to please Srila Prabhupada, for the pleasure of Prabhupada. And also, the school had gained support from the other ISKCON members, and many students sent their children. And by the time Prabhupada visited that place, it was like around 50 students enrolled the school already. And Prabhupada also commented about the weather of the Dallas. It reminded him of Kolkata, which was like uncomfortably hot for him. And disdaining the use of the air conditioning, he shed his kurta and he sat on the lawn with his inexperienced but the eager group of teachers. He mentioned that the best system of education should be like like one teacher in a room with up to 50 students of various ages and aptitudes, and one at a time the students would come to the teacher's desk and get the guidance from the teacher, and then further assignment, and then return to the work. And the Gurukula teachers were particularly concerned and puzzled how to discipline the children without being punitive, and Prabhupada unhesitatingly solved all their puzzles. So he told them like the students should both fear and love their teachers, and the teachers by their stern countenance should may threaten an unruly child and make him submit, but the teacher should not hit the child. So next day, Prabhupada went into a classroom and he sat on a cushion before the class. He was holding a blackboard pointer in each hand, and he was joking like one stick will be used to hit the student's head and the other one was to hit in their hands. And the children and teachers were delighted to see Prabhupada's playful mood, and asked if anyone to get hit, and both the teachers and students showed their interest to get a merciful slap from Prabhupada. And to demonstrate how to teach, Prabhupada called for a volunteer, and student Dwarakadisha came forward, and Prabhupada placed his hand over the boys and guided him repeatedly the first letter of the Sanskrit alphabet. And Prabhupada also received the news of Bombay, to Dallas, like a devotee came to the west from Bombay, informing Prabhupada of Giriraja's recent talk of resigning the president of the center, because he was depressed and he was ineffective in dealing with Mr. N and the lawyers and the government, and also uncooperative devotees. So he was considering himself unworthy to give the charge.
Thank you so much. Nipak, you can read something. Everybody will read 2 paragraphs.
Now, Giriraja's anxiety became Prabhupada's as again he concerned himself with all the affairs of his Jew project. There seemed to be no one he could discuss this with, since the devotees in America knew almost nothing of matters in Bombay. The night was too hot for sleeping, and Prabhupada could not concentrate on translating Srimad Bhagavatam. So he stayed up late, talking with his secretary about Bombay, surmising the mind and mood of Mr. N and expressing his concern for his Hare Krishna land and his wonder at the devotees' hesitation and disheartenment. He turned the argument this way and that, considering it in different lights, until in the early morning he finally put it aside. Afterward, he composed another telegram: settle land immediately at best price possible, and promised to pay it. If he won't, we can pay, suggest 15,000. Don't change presidency until I come. Large marble deities of Radha and Krishna arrived in Dallas by trailer from New York. Prabhupada had specifically selected these deities from Dallas Gurukul while in India and ordered them to be shipped to the United States. The Krishna deity was magnificent. He was tall, bigger than most ISKCON deities, and his limbs and head were strikingly large. According to one story, the deity was several hundred years old and therefore carved according to an ancient tradition. Even though the devotees and Dallas were unprepared to install Radha Krishna deities, Prabhupada told them to get ready in 2 days for the installation, which he would personally perform. So, the Giriraja's anxiety uh, became Prabhupada, like it was like a matter of concern himself with all the affairs of his Jew project, and there seemed to be no one to discuss it with, and devotees in America knew nothing about the matters in Bombay. And the night was too hot and for sleeping, Prabhupada could not concentrate on translating Srimad Bhagavatam. He stayed up late night and talking to the secretary about Bombay and surmising in mind, like Mr. N expressing the concern of his Hare Krishna land and his wonder at the devotees' hesitation. He turned the argument, considering in the lights, like he finally, in the lights until in the morning, he finally put it aside, and he composed a telegram saying that settle the land immediately to the best possible price and promise to pay it off. If he won't, then we can suggest 15,000 payment. Don't charge presidency until Prabhupada is there. And large marbles of deities of Radha and Krishna arrived in Delhi. Prabhupada had specifically selected them, and they were well selected in India, and they were to be shipped in United States. The deity, Krishna deity, was magnificent, and the deities, ISKCON deities, and his limbs, head was strikingly large. And according to one story, deity was several hundred years old and carved to the ancient tradition. And though the devotees and dwellers were unprepared, Prabhupada asked them to get ready to install the deities in 2 days, and which he would personally perform the installation part.
Hari Bol, Radha Kalakanji ki jai. This is the one of the that's the place, the best of the very famous Govindas. For past 10 years, that Govindas is recognized number one in the city. Okay, second Prabhu.
Jahanava Devi Dasi, however, unauthorizedly removed the original paint from the deities and began to repaint them. When Prabhupada heard this, he became furious. He called the Dallas president, Satswarupa Das Goswami, to his room and demanded an explanation. Satswarupa said that he was a fool, but that Jahanava had also acted without his permission. Prabhupada then called for Jahanava and yelled at her furiously. She began to cry. Why have you done this? Srila Prabhupada demanded. Nonsense, was her choked reply. Nonsense, Srila Prabhupada affirmed. Suicidal nonsense. You are a nonsense and you will always remain a nonsense. So what are you going to do about this? Well, Srila Prabhupada, Jahanava replied weakly. I called up Bharadraja in Los Angeles and he said if I use a certain kind of paint. Bharadraja, Prabhupada yelled. Who is this Bharadraja? I am your spiritual master. I am sitting before you. Why do you not ask me? Disgusted, he then turned to the others in the room. So what is to be done about this? One of the ladies said that with a quick drying paint, they could repaint the deities just as before in time for the installation. Yes, Srila Prabhupada said, do it immediately. So in Dallas, Janava Devi Dasi, without any permission, she was painting the deities that they got from India, from New York. And Prabhupada became very angry. He called Satsvarup Das Goswami and demanded an explanation. And Satsvarup Das Goswami said that he is a fool, and she acted without his permission. Prabhupada then called for Janava and yelled at her, chastised her that why did you do this? And she said, nonsense was her choked reply. And Prabhupada says that like you are a nonsense, and he was not happy about this. And she replies back weakly to Prabhupada saying that I called a Bharadraja, and he said if I use a certain, he was giving some excuse. And Prabhupada yelled like, who is Bharadraja? Like I am your spiritual master, without taking my without asking me why did you do this. And then Prabhupada turns to others in the room and asks, what can we do about this? And one of the ladies said that they could repaint the deities just in time for installation. And Prabhupada says, yes, do it immediately.
That's it. These are the unusual situations, the mistakes. It's a very bad thing. And it comes, all this thing comes in with practice of bhakti, Prasanthi, please read.
Jahnava stayed up all night, carefully repainting the deities as before. Early the next morning, which was to be the morning of the deity installation, Krishna looked very beautiful, although his body was tacky in spots from the fresh paint. During that morning's walk around White Rock Lake, while talking philosophically about various topics, Prabhupada turned casually to Satsvarupa Maharaja and asked about the preparations for the installation. When Satsvarupa said he was uncertain whether Krishna's paint would be dry enough, Prabhupada suddenly stopped. If the deities weren't ready, he said, there was no use in his staying any longer in Dallas. Turning to his secretary, he told him to change their flight reservations as soon as possible. Satsvarupa begged forgiveness and said that maybe everything could still be done on schedule. Prabhupada's angry mood changed, and he continued walking, talking about other matters. Later in his room, Prabhupada talked alone to Satsvarupa, continuing on the point of his morning lecture about materialistic life. In a casual way, as most people would talk about ordinary things, Prabhupada spoke of foolishness of the conditioned souls. They think that just by having a big family, being absorbed in mundane activities, they do not have to concern themselves with death or with the next life. As Prabhupada spoke, he shook his head in disbelief, considering the incredulous position of the materialist. Jahnava stayed up all night and repainted the deities to make them look like before. Krishna looked very beautiful, but the paint was not dried up. During the morning walk with Satsvarupa Maharaja, they started talking about the preparations for the installation, and this point came up like Krishna's paint was not would not be dry enough. So Prabhupada suddenly stopped and asked for his reservations to be changed so that there is no use of staying in Dallas and he can leave now. But Satsvarupa asked for forgiveness and asked for him to continue as per schedule. And then Prabhupada's angry mood changed and he continued to walk and talk regularly. Later, Prabhupada talked to Satsvarupa about the materialistic life of people. He spoke about the conditioned souls, how they are thinking that they can have a big family and get absorbed in the mundane activities and not think about death or next life. They are not concerned about it. And Prabhupada shook his head in disbelief about the condition of the materialist.
You see how Prabhupada is heavy on all certain things. At the beginning, it was okay, but as As disciples grew up, they're getting mature, they're able to take the chastisement, and Prabhupada corrected in every step now. AJ, please read.
All of Prabhupada's disciples noted the same amazing thing about him. Wherever he went, his consciousness was always in transcendence. Whether staying up late worrying and talking about Bombay or criticizing devotees for repainting the deity, his mind was ever moving from one Krishna conscious consideration to another. The devotees with him would sometimes observe his awesome Krishna consciousness from a respectful distance. At other times, they might, in the name of service, speak up and become more personally involved. Or they might find themselves thrust under the scrutiny of his demanding attention. No one could presume or accurately predict in what way Prabhupada would act in his constant grave service to his spiritual master. While sitting with Satsvarupa Maharaj, Prabhupada began humming and singing a Sanskrit phrase from the morning's Bhagavatam class. Greshu Graha Madanham. Then he asked, "So how is the deity?" Satsvarupa said he thought he was dry. Prabhupada stood and walked into the room where Janava was examining the repainted deity. Calmly, he stood before Radha and Krishna, singing to himself. "Yes," he said, "now it is all right." So, again, it's kind of like the previous paragraph I read, right, where it discussed how Prabhupada's mind was just always, focused in transcendence and on how to best serve Krishna. And it says like if he was up late at night, or he was dealing with things in India, or dealing with craziness from the devotees, it was always just no matter what the issue was, it was always rooted in Krishna consciousness and his service towards Krishna. And the devotees would be able to sit and take that in. They'd be able to watch and see, and again learn from his example, and it stuck out to them. And so sometimes they'd help, they'd speak up and help out, or other times Prabhupada would pull them into the his service, essentially, right, and say, "Hey, here's what you need to do," and provide a little reprimand and a little direction for them. But they nobody really would know what he was going to do, because in that sense he had a mission, and whatever it took to get that mission, he would do it. And so he's sitting there singing a phrase from the Bhagavatam that I butchered. Is it Grashu Graham Madanham? Is that better?
Grihastha Griha Medhinam.
Medhinam.
Grihastha Griha Medhinam means those are materialistic families.
Okay, all right.
Medhinam is those things, my wife, me, and everything. All I, me, mine. That kind of people are called Griha Medhinam. They're not interested in spiritual life.
Okay. So yeah, so then he goes in, he checks on the deity, and Satsvarupa's like, "I think he's dry. I think Radha and Krishna are dry now." So Prabhupada goes and check it out, and again, just singing to himself and just taking in the deities, and he said, "Yep, now we're good. That looks good." So
very nice, special, interesting. Okay, Srikar.
Later that morning, in the temple room, Prabhupada sat on his Vyasasan and installed Radha and Krishna. Reciting the prayers from the Brahma Samhita, he then offered the first arati to the deities, who had been hastily dressed and placed on an almost bare altar. Prabhupada seemed pleased, however, and later went up to his room and wrote on a piece of paper, Radha Kalachand Ji, the deity of Dallas, September 12, 1972, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. Kalachand Ji, he said, meant black moon. Prabhupada was preparing to return soon to India via a western route, and he prepared another visit to his Western World headquarters in Los Angeles. On the very day he arrived, however, he wrote more directions to the devotees in Bombay, reassuring them the Juhu land was not just a trouble spot, but a special place where a great plan would be carried out. It was worth fighting for. So later that day, the next morning in the temple room, Srila Prabhupada sat on his Vyasasan and he installed the Radha Krishna deities. And then he recited the prayers from the Brahma Samhita. And then he offered the first start to the deities, and then the deities were just barely, hastily dressed and were placed on a very bare altar. So Srila Prabhupada was, however, little pleased, and then later he went into his room and wrote on a piece of paper Radha Kala Chandraji, and then he named the deities Radha Kala Chandraji. Kala Chandraji means black moon. Then Srila Prabhupada was preparing to return to India very soon via the western route, via the west coast. And then he paid another visit to the Western World headquarters in Los Angeles. And then the day he arrived in Los Angeles, he gave more directions to the devotees in Bombay. He wrote in a letter giving more directions, saying them that the Juhu land was not just a trouble spot, but it is a very special place, and then where a great plan would be carried out. So he said, no matter what, it is worth fighting for.
Mr. Vijayanand Prabhu. Okay.
Now I am anxious to hear if the conveyance deed had been signed and what are the contents. Kindly send me the copy duly signed as quickly as possible. This will give me a great relief. As soon as the conveyance has been signed, you may begin the building work immediately. I'm coming to India soon, at least by October, and I want to see that the building projects in Bombay, Mayapur, and Vrindavana are going on nicely. This Bombay project is one of our most important projects in the whole world, and I'm looking to you and the others there in Bombay to see that it is done very magnificently. Prabhupada, the secretary, had recently shown him a new advertisement booklet printed by Air India, in which the art theme was exclusively dedicated to Krishna and Vrindavana. Prabhupada was encouraged to see that Air India was enticing tourists to come to India to experience Krishna culture. This confirmed his idea that in the future, Hare Krishna land and his other Indian projects would be important showpieces for tourists wanting to experience real Vedic culture. So Prabhupada was anxious about the Bombay temple. So he was asking his devotees to share the conveyance deed after it is signed, and he wanted to know what is the contents over there. He said that it will give me great relief. Also, he mentioned that as soon as the conveyance deed is completed, the building work should start immediately. And when he comes to India soon on the October, he want to see the building projects in Bombay, Mayapur, Vrindavana going on nicely. And he also mentioned the Bombay project is one of the most important projects in the whole world. And so he looked into the others in Bombay to see that it is done like in a good manner. Also, Prabhupada's secretary had recently shown him an advertisement printed by Air India, in which the theme was exclusively dedicated to the Krishna and Vrindavana. And Prabhupada was encouraged to see that Air India was enticing the tourists to come to India and experience the Krishna culture. So this confirmed that in future, the Hare Krishna land and these other Indian projects will be an important showpieces for tourists who want to experience the real Vedic culture.
Very nice. I think we can end here. I was very much inspired to see devotees' commitment and relationship with spiritual master. So committed. Sometimes I feel like it's not easy to handle. To deal with so much. I mean, everybody was so much engaged. I think we will hear about New Vrindavan very soon also, right? How many of you been to New Vrindavan? No one, huh?
I went to.
Prashant is a special privilege. And our Samarth Prabhu also raised his hand. Samarth Prabhu, you been to New Vrindavan?
Yeah.
Yeah, they are looking for a new brahmachari. Yeah, go. You're disappearing like boom, some magic or something. You have some magic.
No, that's virtual background.
Oh, but you disappear. Background is always there. Now your dad is disappearing. So I think maybe in winter we'll try. Anyone is interested, we can make it nice trip, break. Let's go. We'll have some spiritual retreat, break the winter. I am grateful for everybody for joining, and we have a nice reading. It's almost 40. Now we will have only 20 more chapters. With this, we all are going to get a big certificates. You're certified Prabhupada Lilamrita teacher now. You're eligible to preach all over the world now by Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Prabhupada Lilamrita ki jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Samat Prabhu. Basdev was asking for you.